One, two, three, four. Pedagogy a go go. Pedagogy go go go. Hello and welcome to Pedagogy a Go Go, a podcast about college faculty sharing what happens in their classrooms and why. This is episode 5, Perspectives of the Mad Scientist, and we are your hosts, Gina Turner and Tom O'Connor.
Well, hello, Gina. Spring has sprung, and as we
Yes,
find ourselves
indeed.
in the second episode of our spring season for 2021 of Pedagogy a Go Go. How have you been?
Good, good. I have to say it was so fun talking to Andrew McIntosh last time, and he and I were emailing about something work related, but he asked me again about the musicians that I had mentioned in our episode, and so I sent him a
The
link
Native
to
Daughters, right?
Our Native Daughters, yeah,
Our Native
and
Daughters, that was it.
yeah, and I was so pleased that he got a kick out of it. He said that they were more bluesy and harder edge than he was expecting. And so I was really, as someone who is such a music, aficionado and someone who has so much expertise in the area of music, I was glad to get a stamp of approval.
I have many similar stories about one of my greatest badges of pride. I also, for the record, had an Our Native Daughters moment as they showed up on my Spotify contemporary folk playlist.
Oh,
and I was
there we
like,
go.
This is great. And I now know who they are. And Andrew is, there was a time in my life when I considered myself really on top of what was happening in the music industry across many genres. When I was an undergraduate in college, I managed a record store in my high fidelity days. And I've lost a lot of that. And Andrew is so on top and has such a deep knowledge specifically of hip hop. And I was so proud that I had heard Lizzo on the radio just as she was breaking, and she had this old school hip hop feel to much of her work, and I brought her, and Andrew had not heard of her yet. And it was like the pride I carried with me as he listened to it. And it was right before an outdoor, back in the pre-COVID days when we could have outdoor events with students. And he was DJing for the event, and sure enough, queued up Lizzo. And I was like, yeah, that wouldn't have happened without me.
You scooped Andrew. Congratulations.
I scooped Andrew. So that was a big moment.
But I missed that because he would DJ before theater events. And yeah.
Oh, he's insanely talented. So
yeah.
And I play a game that you guys can't play at home, but when we had him here, his backdrop was his vinyl collection, some of which was facing us. And I'm like, I know that, I don't know that. I'll have to ask about that. So yeah, it was wonderful. Actually, I met with him and one of our art faculty, and I was staring at, it was right before the holidays, and I'm like, a very special Christmas one. And she looked at it and she went, Keith Haring, because of Keith Haring is a Kutztown artist who had done the artwork for the album. And so it was everyone, we can't help it. He inspires all of us to try to demonstrate our knowledge, which is what makes him a good teacher.
Wait, did you say Keith Haring was from Kutztown?
Yeah. Originally.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I mean, he worked mostly out of New York, obviously, his work.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he hails from Kutztown initially. So when I'm on my random antique hunting finds, I always hope I'm going to find some Keith Haring piece worth $20,000.
Oh yeah, I bet.
It has not happened yet.
Well, the most famous person from where I live, Lambertville, actually, it was across the river in New Hope, Pennsylvania. But it was Leon Redbone lived there. So I was really excited when I found that out.
So there's a lot
Unfortunately, he passed away fairly recently.
Recently, yeah, that's right. Yeah. And also home of the Pennsylvania Impressionists. So
yes,
you said Redbone, and I'm like, there's an impressionist with the last name Redfield. I was like, I thought we were going a different way and sticking to it. So
nope.
well, we find ourselves with a sociology twofer actually this week. I'm very excited to say that our guest is Professor Erin Reilly, who also teaches sociology classes here at Northampton Community College. She is coming up on almost 20 years here at the college and has had an incredibly storied career leading students on international trips, many of them service learning trips, which I'm sure we're going to dig in today's episode. But importantly, she's also deeply involved in our culture of care here, which is really about knowledge around the specific supports our students need and helping them along their journeys. She is a deeply gifted teacher, an empathic individual, and imagine it's going to be a soul-stirring conversation today.
Absolutely. I'm just so glad to get to see my friend Erin today because I miss us cracking each other up when we see each other in the halls.
And Erin is someone who I've been in all these meetings with and who I've heard so much about, but we have not found ourselves working closely in my time. So today's episode will be a success if Erin leaves it going, well, my friend Tom. So that's my hope. That's where I hope we end up.
And hopefully she still thinks that I'm her friend.
I can't imagine a universe where that isn't the case, Gina. So without further ado, we should bring her in.
If you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would it be?
Well, Erin, welcome to Pedagogy at Go-Go. We are so incredibly happy to have you here. I need to tell you that you're our second guest in a row who teaches sociology courses here at Northampton Community College, and I will say as one myself is also a Lehigh alum. So we are on a social sciences roll here on our podcast. To kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, but also the classes that you teach here, and what it is about your discipline that makes you excited to teach it?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me. I've been here at NCC for, I think, 19 years, which is bananas. I started at the Monroe. It's the longest I've done anything. I started at the Monroe campus where I taught for, 10 or 12 years, I want to say, and then came down to the Bethlehem campus. I've been doing study abroads with students, and I think that's probably the thing that really juices me up the most is to have those experiences with students, out in the real world or just experiencing new things together. I think that's really empowering. And that's definitely been among the most rewarding things that I've had the opportunity to do here at NCC. So I teach, as you mentioned, sociology. And the classes I teach are principles of sociology, of course, American ethnicity, which is our version of a race and ethnicity course. We do sociology of families, cultural anthropology, sometimes deviant, sometimes social problems. And what I love about sociology, why I think it's just a perfect fit for me, is because I don't see the world in black and white, I don't see the world in absolute terms. And sociology is all about the gray. It's all about perspective taking. And so it just fits the way I think. But I think today in 2021, in such a polarized world, where people are happy to debate, but they're not necessarily happy to think things through or empathize or take other perspectives. I think that's one of the things that's most rewarding and important about sociology right now is encouraging people to take different perspectives and encouraging people to see the world through multiple perspectives.
That's really exciting. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Oh no, I just you said something, and I would die if I didn't follow up on it, because you're so right. As you were speaking, we are so entrenched in partisan divides and even radical divides between left to right, rich, poor, you name it. How do you help students with that perspective shifting, teaching them to embody other perspectives?
Well, that's what sociology is. So I have the benefit to some extent of hiding behind the discipline, or just, instead of it being, your crazy liberal professor, insert name, it's, well, this is what sociology is. It's about seeing the world through different perspectives. So I get to use that, I guess. And so that's been really helpful. If somebody comes, into the class with a specific perspective, it's okay, well, this is a class about taking other perspectives. So what's another way that we can look at it? Or, there are theoretical perspectives that we learn And we dig pretty deep into them in the first few weeks of an intro to sociology course. So then it's, okay, well, what would functionalism say about it? What would conflict theory say about it? So, I joke about hiding behind things, but sociology is literally a framework for thinking about the world in multiple perspectives. And then another thing that's really helpful about sociology in a time like this is not only is it about these theoretical frameworks, but then it's about data. Well, this is what we think. This is what I'm hearing you say. Why don't we check the data? Let's see what's actually going on. And we can talk about, the conflict sometimes that exists between what we assume and what's real.
I was going to say, it's so exciting to hear you say all of those things in the framework of sociology, because I just happened to have a meeting with a student before we recorded today, and she's a student in my research methods class. And this was exactly the conversation that we were having, which is that psychology is looking at tendencies of people, but it's not a black and white explanation of people always do X and therefore Y. It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. And so, of course, sociology and psychology have a lot in common in those ways. And that was the other thing we pointed out, is that research is continuing, it's iterative. And so we look at the data, and then that might raise more questions, and we gather more data. So I love that you highlighted that aspect of sociology as well. Definitely.
Well, that just brings to mind, Gina, the times that you've been able to pop into my classes.
Yeah.
And that's always so exciting because, again, it's another perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And it's really, it's really fun. And I think it's helpful for the students, because I've also had students in my psych classes who have taken Soc, and they say, oh my gosh, the terms are similar. And I say, yeah, because these are sort of different layers through which you can look at the world. And then I have to also point out, you mentioned the study abroad and study away trips that you've taken, and some of those have been service trips, and for example going to New Orleans, so which I have always completely admired, and maybe you can say a little bit more about those trips and how those came about.
Yeah, sure. I want to say 2009 might have been the first time we went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina to help rebuild. And we worked with an organization called lower9.org in the Lower Ninth Ward. And even though we were there, a couple of years after the storm, it was still like a war zone very much for the first few years that we were going. Roads were just, they had craters in them. There was no mail delivery. Schools were still closed, years after the fact. And so, we were still doing demo work. We were still doing mold remediation. We all got sick the first time we came home because we inhaled so much mold. Just the state of things was just really hard to believe. We might read about it, but to live it is something different. And that's, of course, why these experiences are so powerful for students. Yeah. Because as powerful as it is for us, to be learning about something, to be learning about structural racism, and then to see it firsthand, right? To learn about poverty and about infrastructure and abandonment, but then to see it firsthand. It's just, there's no comparing the two.
Right. It's, absolutely. Well, I'm going to move on to our next question, which oftentimes people find the hardest question of all, which is what? The question is, if you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what word would that be?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Feel free to use Puwabasha.
So I'm going to say there's a pre-COVID word that I would use to describe myself, and a present tense word that I would use to describe myself. So pre-COVID, I think it would have been mad scientist. And that's great. It's one of the things I love about teaching, because you hit the restart button every 15 or 16 weeks. So you try things out and you see how it works, and then you talk to students about it and you get feedback. And then if it tanks, you try again, so we're just mad tinkerers. And that's how I would have described this position, this job, a year ago even. But now I see it. I see myself as an advocate right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what's going to happen when we get back to whatever the new quote unquote normal will be. Will I be a mad scientist, or will I continue to lean into this advocacy role? I think it's an open question, but yeah, just advocating for students. Did you know that you're entitled to this? Did you know that we have counseling? Did you know that we have academic coaches? Did you know that we have tutors? And obviously these are college services here at NCC through the Learning Center, through the counseling department, advocating for students who are houseless, who need food. I mean, I just feel like right now the priorities for me have shifted. And I think and so I think that's reflected in the way that I'm approaching classes.
Yeah.
Erin, it's funny. I wanted to talk a little bit about this regardless, because not just your sociological background, but many of the courses you teach, including sociology of families, American ethnicity, are closely paired with our social work program, and students who are, that's part of their program map. And then you've also taken these service-oriented trips. So as you're talking about being a mad scientist, sidebar and mad scientist, I am the crazy fill-in-the-blank liberal arts professor, and those sound pretty close. There's some intersectionality there, I think. But then you also talk about the new advocacy that COVID has asked of us. And I was curious, as through the lens of someone aligned with all these students on the social work track and as a sociologist, how you're differently seeing the needs of our students. And I wonder if that's an either or question or a both end. I mean, will there be a space post-COVID for both mad scientist, Professor Reilly, and also advocacy, Erin?
I think that's a great question. And I mean, time will tell, but I guess if I think about where my interests have evolved over the years, I think advocacy has become a bigger part of my teaching. And, this has just blown it up. COVID has just blown it up. So I think there's definitely room for the two. And, I went to the Achieving the Dream conference a couple of years, was that a year ago or 2 years ago? We're in a time warp, right?
Yep.
Time has lost all meaning.
Seriously. And, the theme of this conference was essentially like, what are you going to do to support your students who have so much going on in their lives and who are really, living the structural inequality and the class inequality that we talk about in our classrooms. And so that was always something that was of interest to me. And that just kind of crystallized it, right? How higher ed is just completely set up for a system that doesn't really match the people that we're serving. And just to have the opportunity to think critically about that. And now that we're in this, moment of national emergency, that just, to me, that just seems to be what's most important.
Well, you've perfectly queued up my next. Oh, sorry, Gina, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to quickly say, in a way, we've had to be mad scientists in order to turn ourselves into advocates for our students, right? In order to think about how we're balancing what the needs are of the class and the rigor of the class and the information that we want to convey in the class with the students' ability to take in that information and really to make it relevant to them. And, and again, I think we count ourselves lucky because we feel like what we're teaching is almost life and death, in a way. It's really teaching students skills of being in the world,
right.
And interacting with other people in the world. So, Tom, you had a question, and then I had a question.
This is the way it's supposed to work. And of course, I'll begin my question by simply saying, I love that, Gina, because what you just suggested, this idea of the mad scientist, in my mind, when I think of what that might be, it actually connects with a lot of pedagogical concepts like universal design for learners. Is the mad scientist the person who's willing to step outside of their comfort zone, to do anything, to look differently at our students, their needs, the way they learn, to try to best help them, recognizing that that's an individuated approach. It can't be a one size fits all for really any classroom pre-COVID, but COVID has, I think, really brought that to the fore. My question, Erin, was simply that you were already kind of addressing the way that the pandemic of the last year has changed our classrooms and the way we teach. And you began to speak towards actually my next question, which was about how the events of the last year, not just COVID, obviously, there's so much more than that,
Mm-hmm.
how they've impacted your discipline, but also if you could change one thing either about what sociology is focusing on and talking about right now, or, and this is kind of where you were alluding to, maybe perhaps how higher ed needs to be thinking about things differently.
Mm-hmm.
What change would that be and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been so much societal change. So obviously curriculum in sociology has to be updated. Like content has to be really updated to accommodate that and to acknowledge that. We can't be teaching inside of a bubble. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in terms of the tinkering, speaking to the mad scientist in us, the tinkering that I've done, has mostly been on bringing those issues into the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
right? Updating the readings, updating activities, films, just to acknowledge the times that we're in and to get us thinking about them and to be taking multiple perspectives about them. And so I see that as being the major change in a classroom, in a sociology classroom at least, is,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much going on in the world. How do we bring that in a meaningful way? Because, there's a lot. And to bring something in a cursory way, it's not necessarily helpful just to,
Mm-hmm.
tip your hat to it and to not really dig into it. It's just not very meaningful. So that's been, I think, the disciplinary, if you will, based challenge. What was the other part about higher ed?
Yeah, higher ed in general, and I think you're speaking to both at the same time, because what you
Yeah.
are talking, curricular change is structural change to higher ed,
Mm-hmm.
but seeing the needs of our students that have been
Mm.
exposed in the last year, maybe are there things that you'd like to see higher ed doing in general, either specific to our community
Yeah.
college or more
Mm-hmm.
systemically?
I think higher ed in general needs to just take the time to acknowledge the people that we serve. I mean, period. I think that's in the classroom. I think that's out of the classroom. I think it's in terms of financial aid offices, it's records office. Across the board, we need to be asking ourselves, are we actually serving the people that we're serving?
Mm-hmm.
We're offering services, but are we serving the people that we're supposed to be serving? And, I'm not immune to this. I have to ask myself that every semester as well. So, it's not about singling out specific offices on any college campus. I just think every institution of learning, period, but higher ed in particular, we really need to acknowledge who we're serving. We're casting a wider net, and that's a good thing, but college was designed for elite people a really,
Mm-hmm.
really long time ago. And the structure of that has not changed. And so I do think that COVID, I mean, maybe in some ways it'll be an opportunity because we've had to change so much, so fast. And, higher ed is slow to change in some ways. It's bureaucratic in that way. Maybe we will be open to rethinking some things because maybe some of the solutions are different versions of things that we're doing now. Hybrid classes, for example, 7-week classes, more 4-week classes. We have to change this archaic financial aid system where money can only be delivered, once a semester. It's how are students going to be able to take those 4 and 7-week classes if money is only dispersed at one point? So there's a lot of, I think, procedural things that we could be doing better and we should be doing better in higher education.
Yeah, I mean, in some respect, this reset button that has been pressed by the pandemic hopefully will serve us going forward, because like you say, the surprising, I think, to many people, although people who had been working online prior to this, recognize that it can be a valid way of teaching, but these hybrid classes I've heard many people, faculty and students, say that they really like that model, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you said that really struck me was about constantly updating information. And I have to talk about the student again. It was a really great conversation with her. And she's a non-traditional age student. She shared her age, that she's 50, and she's currently taking a class on, oh my gosh, I don't remember the exact class, but it has to do with women in politics.
Mm.
And she said, I've lived on this earth for 50 years and I had no idea about this structural sexism that I've been breathing my whole life. And she says, I feel like, what do I do now that I have this information? And thinking about the events of last summer, I imagine your American ethnicity class is like a moving target right now because it's caused us all to think about everything so differently. But at the same time, we're also dealing with being in a pandemic and stuck in our homes and homeschooling children and et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder if all of these balls we're having to juggle and taking into consideration all of these needs is a recipe for burnout. Are you doing anything for yourself to try and balance all of these demands while still trying to be the incredible, responsive professor that you are?
So I feel like that's a two-pronged question. I mean, I think, your conversation with your student brings to mind conversations that I've had with my students, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know this. And some of them feel really discouraged. And I try the angle of, well, this information is designed to be empowering because now we know.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody is so weighed down right now that the now what just seems, it probably would always seem huge, but right now, when people are having a hard time looking for tomorrow, maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, it's hard to look to tomorrow. So it's hard to think about how to change.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exhausting.
It is. And so when we have these lessons about structural sexism, structural racism, how the system is rigged, et cetera, students want to know now what, but none of us really have the energy right now to get that far. So I think that's something that I have my eye on in my classes. It's something that I'm going to need to do better once I'm out of this phase. And in terms of my own burnout, I don't know.
The most honest answer.
Yeah. So I have a kindergartner, and so he goes to school 2 days a week. And in February, he went to school 3 times because of the weather.
Oh my gosh.
So it was just, and our students are going through this too, and with fewer resources, many of them, and with less privilege, many of them. And so I think about how hard it's been for me and my partner, and we're lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the burnout is real. I guess I'm at the point in my career where I'm fortunate, where I'm established. So I can have boundaries. So I guess that's the only answer I have.
Yeah. I mean, that's really good to point out. Is I think that we can forget that we have a little agency, and then there are those of us who are luckier to be established in our positions. But I mean, it's probably an unfair question because we're so in the midst of it all. We're still fighting the fight.
Sometimes the story of how we work our way out of that paper bag is an important one to tell, even if we don't know what the light looks like on the other side. And I just had a terrible "They Might Be Giants" song spring to mind, and some deep cut fan will recognize exactly what song I'm referencing, and I won't say any more than that. Erin, first of all, thank you for just acknowledging in your last answer the privilege we have for those of us speaking today, and like that acknowledgement of it, right? Structures much of our advocacy. I think a lot about that because it's been a dark year, and it's easy to kind of fall into like, I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, and I don't know how I'm going to get the energy and the mental space, to face it. But countering that is the fact that we are still secure in our jobs. We're able to be remote if necessary. We're still well positioned to help others, in many ways. And so like when in all of our discussions that are built around class structures, race, gender disparities, systemic sexism, and racism, like it's just an important thing to keep at the forefront of our minds. I'm going to begin this question with a story I have to share because Erin, I know you've been involved with the culture of care here, which is kind of the word we're using, which I think is intended to address some of the needs, right? Making sure that the services we offer fit the students, just like the mad scientist in the classroom. So I wanted to tell the story of a lunchbox. what it takes these days. And so there is a fabulous staff member at the Monroe campus who works closely with some of our student workers. I know a student worker well. He's been here for a while. He takes the bus every day to the Monroe campus. He came in at a developmental level, and he has persisted. He is consistently a success story, the kind of student that we want to support, and we have been. And he works these, student support jobs, manning desks and stuff, to sustain his career here as a student. And because of the weird mechanisms and machinations of living amidst COVID and spaces, he was working like these long days, wanted to bring a lunch, couldn't leave the desk he was manning, and just simply asked, could I use a refrigerator? And because of where it was located and how many people were in that space, was told no. And this staff member said, okay, and went to the bookstore and used her budget card and simply say, I'm going to spend $10 to get you a lunch card and an ice pack so that every day that you come, you have what you need so your food stays here and you can do the job. And if anyone kicks that up the ladder, that's my gift to you. And too often it ends up having to be that. I mean, I know
Right.
I've given the bus fare to students who need it if they didn't have a free extra pass at the bookstore, to provide to them. And I tell that story because that staff member, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the heroes working here, who takes that interest in care, but that also points to, I think, some of the changes, the lenses we need to put on. So with that in mind, can you share a student story about either an individual student or perhaps it's something you're seeing in multiple students that speaks to the current moment we find ourselves in, and that you feel other educators would benefit from hearing? And that might be a success story, or it might be a student that ended up on the ropes and the rocks because the supports weren't there for them, but that a story that you want others to hear.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's so many stories. So I guess I would start there, whether you're looking at in your classroom on campus or you're looking out on your little boxes on Zoom, I go through this exercise where I'm like, I know what you're dealing with, and oh my God, how are you here? And okay, we've been talking about this, and I'm ticking through the class, kind of identifying in my mind what people are going through. And I always have to stop to remember, these are just the stories I know about. And every time I go through this exercise, it just always takes me back because there are so many stories that are so profound, but those are just the stories that I know about. And I feel like that is really powerful. It's really powerful for me. It's really centering for me, I guess I should say. But, I mentioned earlier that with COVID, I've been more of an advocate. And so, I'm just checking in on students a lot more than I ever did before. Hey, I noticed you missed a quiz. Is everything okay? Not, why did you miss the quiz? Not, just a hi, how are you? And I started doing that right after, we went remote in March. And I've gotten, I have no way of knowing if it's helped students, persist. But I have one example of a student who missed a quiz. So I sent him such an email and he said, oh man, thank you for reaching out. My brother was shot 3 days ago, and my cousin was shot and killed 5 days ago. My uncle died of COVID yesterday. Other family members are in the hospital. And I mean, that was a week of his life, right? I mean, and somehow he had the wherewithal to persist, right? And to finish the class and to do really, really well in the class, right? Completely unbelievable. I don't know if he was planning to reach out to me. I don't know if he, I don't know. He's a good student. He has the toolbox. Talk about the lunchbox, right? He has the toolbox. But, I think it's some have the wherewithal to continue and some don't. And sometimes we play it out like, oh, some students are so strong. Well, I think some students just have the wherewithal in that moment to come back or to finish,
Mhm.
and some students don't. And I think they need grace. I mean, I think we all need grace. I need to give
Mhm.
myself grace right now because I'm not doing everything that I would like to be doing at the level that I wish I was doing it at. You know,
Right.
but I mean, we all deserve grace right now. And I feel like that's where we can come in as faculty, to be empathetic and to understand the situation. Like, it doesn't mean that we're changing standards, or that our
Mhm.
classes are
Mhm.
not as difficult, which I do hear rumblings about among colleagues. And I think it's an interesting conversation that maybe we need to have. We're not being empathetic is understanding where they're coming from or trying to, right? We're not being sympathetic. We're not feeling sorry for them so that we
Mhm.
say, you don't have to do that assignment. Oh, you know what?
Right.
Just don't worry about it. It's
Yeah.
just, granting grace in a moment where people need it.
I mean, I think that's addressing the issue of burnout, right? Is to recognize that we're human beings interacting together, doing the best we can, and giving ourselves that perfect word, that grace. And talking about the stories of the students, I mean, that we said unbelievable, but sadly, it's not unbelievable because these are the stories that our students are living. And I was thinking a little bit about how I'm sharing more of my own stories with my
Right.
students and being there sort of, I mean, literally they're in our homes now, and we're in their
Right.
homes in these little boxes, and dogs are barking and kids are coming up and saying hi, and spouses are walking by and partners and sisters and brothers. And also I'm actually doing an assignment with my students this semester for the first time, which I'd never done before. And just briefly, it's my health psychology class, and I ask them to do a personal health intervention. So for 8 weeks, they're trying to change a health behavior. And I said, I'm going to do it with them. And so, because I need to do some stuff because this pandemic has been rough on me. And so I picked a little thing. I'm going to try and jump rope regularly, which
Wow.
it
That's
was
so
something I was
cool.
doing this summer. So anyway, and so it's 6 weeks of written kind of almost journal entries, and I'm sharing my journal entries with them.
I love
But
that.
it's feeling like we are just all people, in this together. Like
Right.
I heard at a meeting the president of our college had last week, and he quoted something he had seen on Facebook about,
Right.
we're not all in the same boat. We're in the same sea, but some
Right.
of us have yachts and some of us have dinghies and et cetera, et cetera. But,
Right.
recognizing that we are all in the same sea, I think
Mm-hmm.
is part of that grace.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's just beautifully said. Do you feel like there is an assignment that, as part of your advocacy mad scientist, do you feel like there's an assignment that has bubbled up in this past year that you feel like kind of does all those things, hits those marks? It still has the rigor, it's still doing what you want it to do, but it's
Mm.
having an outcome that is special or
Mm.
interesting or illuminating.
To be quite honest, I haven't changed very many of my assignments. And here's the mad scientist reason behind it, right? Like, now is not a time for uncertainty. Now is
Uh,
not a time for things to be unclear.
yeah.
Um, I'm just kind of using what has worked for me in the past. I have language written up on it. I know how to organize it in
Yeah.
Blackboard. And so I'm trying to just make everything in Blackboard super, super linear. And so I've been recycling many assignments. I've been doing more journaling with
Oh.
students, like short things, and
Mm-hmm.
that's been helpful. I feel like we're more likely. I mean, speaking for myself, I have more time to sit down and read a short journal reflection without being taken in a different direction than to read a paper. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been helpful for me to help me get to know the students, and it's fitting with my limited attention span right now. And so we'll see if that's working, but it's nice. It's one way to get to know students for me
Yeah.
because what I would normally do is just go to class for a few minutes early and just walk around the room and, hey, how are you doing? Do you have the textbook? How are your classes? What are you taking? What's your major? And, just get to know students that way. Every day, just walk around and see who wants to talk.
Yeah.
And it's a lot harder to do that now. So these little, I call them, I guess they're like little critical thinking assignments, because students then have to integrate something from the reading materials, into the journal, into their writing, I should say. So that's been a nice way to just connect with students a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to say, I haven't rewritten the playbook right now. I just can't.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Gina.
I was just going to say, I hear you. I also did not rewrite my playbook. And as a matter of fact, did exactly what you just said, which is just to try and make sure everything's streamlined. If anything, I've added more instructions. Mm-hmm. I'm creating short videos, which I had not done in the past
for my online
been? Classes.
Have you found that interesting, helpful?
I find it helpful for me. Maybe it's my craving interaction with other humans. The idea that it's a message in the bottle to students. So, but I hope that they're finding them illuminating. And it's part of this, my doing the assignment. I'm showing them what I'm writing in the assignment and talking about my rationale behind it. So I'll let you know.
That connects. So I just heard this story literally within the last 24 hours and I loved it. And it was a person was talking about, and we've changed a lot. And Erin, I want to just applaud for a second the fact that one of the things that you're saying is now is not necessarily the time to reinvent the wheel. We just need to reconfigure in our minds how the wheel was going to effectively hit the road and travel forward. So
Right.
if one of the most effective things we were doing was that initial time in class when we were going around, how do we produce that in a remote environment, right? And so like trying to, I don't want to say repackage the same, but we know what was already effective, and how do we retain that? And one of the mistakes that I think, and I could say this as a member of the administration as well as a faculty member who teaches, which is that I think that in the initial COVID, when we were like, oh shoot, everything's going to change. We're going to be 90% online. People without online teacher training, we need to get them as trained as possible. We need to recognize what we're going to need. And so there was a sense of messaging out, well, we need to do everything differently because this is a new world. And we probably got that wrong. And I think I want to really address the fact that we also needed to be saying, let us help you transcribe what you were already doing into this new medium, into the mediums that we were using. So I'm really glad you said that, because like it seems like people want to be like, well, I'm doing everything new and it's going great. And then the reality is like this person who says this has worked really well for me 90% of the time. I found a way to do it that's also successful here. Mm-hmm. So the story just quickly was that a person had course copied from a blended online course where they had recorded some lecture and they were into an asynchronous course, right? Mm-hmm. And they'd taken everything out, but on 1 week, they left their video up from that class that they had recorded and posted for the benefits. And so all of their asynchronous classes had this random video pop in a couple weeks in that happened to begin with a description of the paper product and talking through it and fielding some questions, and then like a description, a little bit of the story that was being used for the paper. And that video, without being assigned, being there by accident, ended up with like 120 views. And there were all these individual posts saying, that was so great, so like just that happy accidents are also happening in this crazy time. Gina, were you going to come in and say something? I feel like did I step or you?
Erin? I think Erin was going to say something. I think
I was just going to thank Tom for acknowledging that. I mean, I think that in higher ed and not just here at NCC, but in the groups that I'm involved in on social media, there's been all this talk about all this new technology and all these bells and whistles, and I don't doubt that many of them can be valuable, but I think there's also some, from a student's perspective, like how many new things does a student have to do in their first semester in this brand new format? And I kind of made a conscious decision to not embrace some of them right now. It doesn't mean that I won't, but just to, I don't know, kick it old school for a while.
I am in complete agreement with you, Erin. Again, also as someone who had taught online for so many years,
Yes.
I'm like, those classes were actually robust, valid ways of teaching. So why do I suddenly have to infuse 5 pieces of technology? And again, some things I have been excited to incorporate, like using the whiteboards during the online session and then saving that whiteboard into the Blackboard shell after class has been a nice tool for just as a kind of a low tech example, really.
Right. But helpful.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that was a privilege, I will say, for those who had taught online prior to COVID and who had built
Agree.
out online asynchronous. That was a
Mhm.
huge leg up. And that was also the other area where we dropped the ball. We couldn't require every faculty member to take the really intensive 4-week training, robust training that we demand of asynchronous in this shortened summer when everything was topsy-turvy. And we were asking them to teach courses that had a half asynchronous component. So I think honestly acknowledging that. And for those, and I was one of those, I had actually done the training, which was incredibly helpful to me. But at the same time, like I had not done it before. And so there was a sense of, I want to pull these technologies in, and I had to spend more time building out. So for those of you who felt that struggle, who hadn't taught online, I just want to say that we here at the podcast are with you too.
Solidarity.
Yes. And so that was a personal struggle I had. So let me ask you, Erin, what did, this is one of those very introspective questions where we ask you to, in a very Brene Brown way, be vulnerable. But what do you see as your biggest struggle as a teacher, and how are you working on improving and growing in that area? And that can be in the short past term, in terms of the last year, or certainly something that I can think of many struggles as a teacher. I've lived with some since the very first time I walk into a classroom.
Yeah, I mean, it's evolving, right? I mean, and I think it's a good thing that it's evolving. Our challenges are evolving. It means we're getting more comfortable and more confident, and hopefully we're learning more and more as we go. I think my biggest struggle as a teacher today is that there's more that I want to do, but I just don't have the wherewithal to do more right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to that boundary setting for self-care, the reality on the ground in my home with a only child who's been home like alone for a year, who needs a buddy, And now we're also kindergarten teachers on top of it. Like, I just don't have the wherewithal to be as innovative as I wish I could. So my biggest challenge right now is, as much as, 5 minutes ago, I was singing like, yes, keep it simple. That doesn't mean that somewhere in the back of my head, I wish that I were like exploring some of these ideas that I have that I just don't have the wherewithal to do right now.
I think what makes you and, those of us who have that insecurity about being a good teacher, that's what makes us good teachers, right? Because we are constantly casting in our mind of what is of value that I can put into this, and feeling a little guilty if we can't constantly be creating the world's best class session every single time we either literally or figuratively walk into the classroom.
Yeah, this has been hard on like the perfectionist in me. And honestly, I don't think I realized how much of a perfectionist I was necessarily until all of this hit. So there's your Brene Brown vulnerability lesson, right? I've definitely had to do that introspection and catch some of that and, push back against it a little bit.
Well,
I got yelled at this morning by my wife because she was like, I found myself with like an hour-long break in the day, and she caught me pacing, and I was like, and that would have been, she knows, like, I'm like, it is my mother and me that always need to be doing something, and I'm just kind of built that way. And in those moments, there is a disjuncture because I also feel like I'm totally out of gas. The chamber is on E, and so like, so my lack of self-care means I pace and then get yelled at by my wife. I'm sorry.
It's so
Gina, I had to-
interesting how it's contradictory, right? Like that, right? Like I
Yeah.
just find those things to be really interesting. I'm sorry, Gina.
Oh no, that's okay. You mentioned, of course, that your little boy's an only child, and I was an only child, and so for me, the pandemic in many ways suits me because I'm used to being on my own and living in my head and not not feeling a need to interact with other humans. But of course, as a grown woman, I probably should interact with other humans, and so one of my aspects of self-care has been to take classes, just for fun classes here and there. And I always love being a student again, because then it reminds me of what I like and don't like about individual, classes, and then what I might be doing that is, that I wouldn't like if I were a student. So can you think of any ways in which experiences you had as a student have informed the way that you teach, or have even, inspired you as a teacher, or been cautionary tales as a teacher?
So the first thing that comes to mind is actually one of my mentors recently passed away, and I definitely see her in my teaching style, which is, I don't think it was planned that way, but after a few years, I was able to look back and see it, which was pretty cool.
That's great.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that's a real testament to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. She was wonderful, and yeah, she was just very laid back, obviously smart as a whip, but yeah, just very, very in tune, very caring. So I'm kind of stumbling over this because I guess it's a longer story. When I was an undergrad, I majored in sociology, but I also majored in environmental policy.
Oh.
And as a cruel twist of fate, I had to minor in economics, which I hated. I mean, it makes sense, right? You're going to study the environment. You got to know how the system works. But it was awful for me. I hated it. I was the only, person in the economics class raising my hand. They're like, there is no silent force of the market. That's you people, right? That's a human construction.
Oh, God bless you.
And so I had a couple economics professors who, again, I didn't want to be an economics minor, but they were the ones who took me under their wing, so to speak. I was a TA for one of them. I was a research assistant for another one. And they knew I didn't buy what they were selling. And I feel like that has, but they were so empathetic and understanding, and they made it real to me, and they made it applicable for me. And, we teach so many general studies students. And so I think that's something that they maybe passed on to me, right? I mean, a lot of the students taking a psych class or a sociology class don't want to be there. Why do I have to take this class, right? It's just checking a box. So having had professors be so empathetic to me and so invested in my success when I was straight up not into what they were all about.
Although in a way, you probably kind of excited them again, because you were giving them, kind of like you say with sociology, you were already a sociologist. You were giving them a different lens on economics that they don't normally get to, kind of volley with in their classes with their econ majors. So that was probably exciting for them.
I never thought of it that way. It's interesting.
It is fun. I got to talk about this student that I met with again today, because she pushed back a little bit on some of the materials that we use. I won't go into the whole story, but it's really, it caused me to like kind of wake up and go, yeah, let me explain this assignment and why I do feel like this is of value to you. And so kind of reminds me of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and even kind of helped her to understand, oh, okay, so now I see the value in this. But yeah, being pushed sometimes can be really, really engaging for a professor. So having students who push us, I think, can be really exciting.
That's true.
Erin,
You nailed it.
I want to interrogate, and so like, and you don't feel like you have to answer this, but and I'll begin by sharing because this I play this role frequently on like I like telling the stories of my pratfalls, those times that I've just fallen flat on my face in the classroom, as learning experiences. And you talked about having kind of this really valued teacher in your past who there was I don't want to call it a revelatory moment, but a moment when you found yourself embodying a part of that within your own classroom. I had the exact opposite experience my first semester teaching, where I had, as an undergraduate student, I took I took a creative writing class, and I love creative writing, and I did not respect my instructor. I felt like he was far too in love with himself, that he like couldn't pass up the opportunity to make a good joke, and like was putting on more of a show than he was actively present in terms of listening to the students' stories. And when I was teaching, and I taught my first class at Lehigh University before I even took my first class as a graduate student, actually, because I taught at 8 a.m. Monday morning and was a teaching fellow there. And I was, pardon my language, pissed terrified in that classroom in a 3-piece suit with my mouth going dry 3 times. And I overcompensated. And about like 3 or 4 weeks into that semester, I found that I had turned into that professor, that I was putting on this performance to keep the students entertained because I couldn't risk, doing a Jimmy Stewart impression when we're going to watch Rear Window, and trying to get them engaged through putting on a performance, through getting them engaged, through asking good critical questions of the material. So that was and I had to course correct and redefine who I wanted to be. And it might not have been my idols in the classroom. It certainly wasn't this person who I thought it was to be. And so it helped me on that process a bit. Where were you in your teaching? Was there a moment you thought of yourself first as a teacher in the classroom and had kind of that empowered moment like, oh, wow, I can do this and I like doing this? Was it that moment did that happen relatively early in your career? Or is that something that you found yourself growing into?
It happened really early in my career, but boy, did I make some gaffes. I mean, I've got plenty of those if you want to talk about it. But I was at Lehigh in the sociology master's program, and something happened. As we know, things happen, and somebody dropped out, leaving NCC high and dry, and they needed 3 sociologists in a heartbeat. And so I got a class, and 2 of my classmates got a class. And really, the first day I was so scared. I was so nervous, and I know it came out. I know it came through. And I made a decision, like, they can't see like this. Like, they're going to be like, it's like a shark in bloody water, or whatever that saying is, which I can't think of at the moment. Right. I felt like they could totally smell the fear. And so I just made a decision, like, okay, here it is. And then that semester, I don't know, midway through, I just knew that it was something that I really liked doing, and that I thought I had the potential to do well, and I got hired like a few weeks later for this job. So I had only taught like 1.5 classes, I think, at NCC before I got this gig. So my road here was super quick, I guess, super short. So I didn't
19 years later, meant to be in the long run, 19 years later.
Carolyn Bortz, our VPAA, called me mid-career a while ago. And I was like, who me? And then I did the math, and yeah, I guess here I am. It's weird,
Your story reminds me, I think the moment I realized I was a teacher, and I was like you, Erin, I was terrified the first time I was in an academic classroom. I had done training back in my, in my first life as a corporate person. But
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I knew I liked, I've always liked telling people things. So I knew I liked that. And I did go to grad school knowing I wanted to teach, but I felt like I had to be, not show fear and be very prepared and have all my ducks in a row. And then I think it was the second class I taught when I was in grad school. And I was talking about child development and their ability to understand depth perception and that kind of stuff. And I didn't have the video, but I was explaining to them this video of a baby watching, it was object permanence, a baby watching a little train go behind a shield, and then it doesn't come out the other side. And the baby's eyes get really big when it happens. And it totally cracked me up as I was telling them. I was like, you should see this baby. And I had another student in the front row who was just in hysterics. Like, I think he was laughing at me because I was laughing so hard, but like, it was, and it was like, we just could not stop laughing. And then the whole class was laughing. And I thought, oh, that's it. I don't need to be, I actually just want to laugh with these people and have a good time.
I think it's so interesting you said that, because that first semester, I had just turned 26. I was still in graduate school, and I looked even younger. And like, I didn't know that I should be nervous professionally. I wasn't nervous about tenure because I didn't know any better. Like, I just didn't. So, being thrust into the situation with a couple of days before the semester started, still being in grad school, doing it on this, like, it was very real, I was just very me in the classroom, and I never thought to do anything otherwise. And I'm really grateful for that turn of events, because I would have overthought it if I had the chance, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. I know what you mean. When I came to NCC, I thought, oh, maybe I should like be professor lady and like buy a jacket. I was just like, nope.
I will embarrassingly, this is actually a good segue to Gina's favorite last question that she will ask momentarily, but I will embarrassingly admit that when I first found out I was going to be teaching English classes and had been accepted into graduate school at Lehigh University, I went to every thrift store in a 25-mile radius and bought every suit jacket with elbow patches that I could find that was within like 2 sizes of me, to the fact that it filled the closet. So there you have
That's
it.
fantastic.
I still enjoy wearing elbow patches when someone can convince me to actually wear a suit jacket.
Just keep a
Meanwhile,
pipe in one of the pockets.
Yes, right. Meanwhile, if I dress up for class, if I dress up for work, I don't feel like me. I don't feel, that's something that it took me a while to learn. Like, just, it's interesting how we feel the most comfortable, and how I think we're most effective when we're comfortable. And for me, that means in, jeans and corduroys.
Yeah. And at the same token, we have colleagues who are just dressed, basically to the nines, just completely on point, because that is how they feel most themselves. So and I think that the students are going to smell that, right? They're going to, as you had said before, they're going to smell it in the water if someone is not being their authentic self at any end of the spectrum.
There's some discipline crossover too. To return to a guest we had a few episodes back, it wasn't in that episode, but I met and was chatting with him about a separate issue. But Professor Samuel Chen, who we had as part of our special 4-part series last semester, we had the back and forth about dress in the classroom and how we wish to be addressed by students, and being the crazy liberal arts professor, I'm Tom. And he talked about, I'm Professor Chen until the moment that you graduate, and then you're not allowed to call me Professor Chen anymore. I'm Sam. And it's because within within political science, where he teaches and worked and has had a storied career, that's very important. And so teaching that decorum is part of the classroom experience. So it was kind of an enlightening experience. And I felt like, I'm like, nope, that's not going to work for me. I'm still circling up the desks and trying to make everyone as comfortable as possible.
Right. Same.
Well, it
recognizing that is a very privileged position as a white man in the classroom, and that's a whole other thing in terms of address and dress within the classroom and the perceptions of students as well as faculty colleagues and stuff. So just to return to privilege. So
that was what I was going to say, Tom, is that it does open kind of a can of worms when talking about the perception of authority in the classroom. But
for sure,
that's another podcast.
Yes,
it's an important can of worms.
So Tom warned you that this is my favorite question, only because I always change the wording of the question, which is guilty pleasures. And then I have to always say, you should never feel guilty.
That was very Seinfeld delivery. You don't need to feel guilty. Guilty, not guilty.
So what is something you'd like to share that brings you joy that you don't think maybe people would know about you?
Yeah, so my favorite breakfast is Diet Coke and a chocolate chip cookie.
That's so great.
And I miss, for those of you at NCC, you know, the big cookie in the cafeteria.
Oh, yeah.
They are just fantastic, and they're warm and they're soft, and I really miss the big cookie.
Oh my gosh.
God.
Oh my gosh. You know what I miss?
There's emojis popping up on our screen as our showrunner is sending you love and applause, Erin, just to be clear.
They have on the soup bar, they have chicken chapachula soup.
I love chicken.
Isn't it good?
It's so good.
I miss it so much.
I know. I love that. Every day. What was it, like on Wednesdays or something like that?
I think so.
It was on a
It
cycle.
was a regular
yeah.
day. Yeah, exactly. That I loved that. And the taco bar, but who doesn't love a taco bar?
Who doesn't love a taco bar? Yep. So my first thing on my to-do list when we get back is to get that big cookie and an ice cold Diet Coke and to have breakfast, maybe with you fine folks.
Absolutely. I if they have the soup bar open, I will just have the chicken chapachula soup for breakfast.
I say that when we're finally back, we celebrate free Diet Cokes and chocolate chip cookies for everyone.
I'm here for that.
Tom, you haven't weighed in on your favorite cafeteria treat.
I buy like 4 different 24-ounce coffees, and I'm terrible. It always returns. Why the show always seems to return to my poor physical and mental health. For the record, I'm terrible at self-care. I also typically eat I do exactly the wrong thing. I drink coffee throughout the day, eat a large meal, and then snack till 11 o'clock watching terrible TV.
It's a good life.
Which is why I'm a 40-year-old with the body of a 65-year-old.
Well, I think one of the words of the day is empathy. So we have empathy for our choices, no matter what they are. Whether it's cookies for breakfast, chicken chapachula for breakfast.
I'm going to throw in another nerd deep cut just quickly because I love it. I don't know if back in the heyday of cartoons in the newspaper, everyone obviously Calvin and Hobbes, wonderful, but I was a Berkeley breathed man. I was a Bloom County Outland Opus fan, and one of my favorite snapshots is a character, Steve Dallas, stand-in for Berkeley Breathed, who wrote the strip, goes to the doctor, and the doctor looks at him and he says, "Steve, your body is poo." and I've often, as I look, consider my life choices and the relative lack of exercise, I said, if my doctor honestly, had an honest conversation with me, it would run along very similar lines.
Well, you are speaking my language. I have 5-year-old humor. I am all into those jokes. There's lots of poop talk going on around here. And on that note.
On that lovely note. Erin, it has been an utter delight. It's always a delight to get to talk to you. And
so good to see you all.
Thank
you for having me.
I know. It's a real treat.
So much.
I can't wait until we're all together in person again on campus.
Yes. Like he said, we should party. We should celebrate.
Totally party. Multiple cookies.
I'll bring the cookies, yes.
Yay!
Pedagogy a go-go. Pedagogy go-go-go.
So that was such a pleasure to talk to Erin today. What a fun episode of our podcast. What a fun guest.
I said it would be soul stirring, and I stand by it. My soul is stirred. I just listening to her speak and talk about her students and the changes she has wrought and moving from a mad scientist to an advocate for them in difficult times, I'm inspired.
Yeah, she always inspires me to be more empathetic. I mean, I think you just see how much she wants to connect with students. You know, she mentioned briefly at the beginning that she and I have collaborated a couple times coming to each other's classes. And it was such a pleasure to see her in action in the room and how much her students really respond to her and respect her too.
Well, I would imagine, and so this is the longest amount of time I've had getting to really have an, an intimate conversation with Erin about her teaching and her practice. And if I had any, here's what I imagine her students think about her, because this was my read, is that she can't help but be anything less than 100% genuine, authentic, and our students
Hmm.
read that.
Hmm.
She strikes me as fearless, passionate, inquisitive, and with a deep held belief in what she does. You know, and
Hmm.
she spoke about, we kind of began with that conversation about opening our students up to right now, and which is an immediately felt need in our nation and globally, the ability to empathically embody a different point of view, to think about problems and people differently, and to embrace different perspectives. And as she was talking about that, she was later talking about students who found their success in the world and in other classes by the toolkit that they had kind of put together. And Erin is in her sociology classes that she teaches. She's teaching the toolkit. She's
Hmm.
given them the toolbox that will make them better students, better career individuals,
And
better
better
people, citizens of
better
the world.
citizens of the world.
Yeah,
Exactly.
see, great
Exactly.
minds, Gina.
And the other thing that I'm going to carry with me is the way she talked about having grace, both for our students and for ourselves. And I think that that's a hard thing for us to remember, especially for ourselves. I'm always trying to advocate for ourselves as teachers to keep ourselves, as mentally and physically healthy as possible so that we can be those scientists and advocates and coaches and leaders and models for our students, but having the grace to give ourselves a break sometimes I think is really important too.
Yeah, that word I thought about as soon as she used it, I thought, well, you could have plugged this into her answer about self-care and what she's
Hmm.
doing to take care of herself in this time, her presence in the classroom, her self and identity in terms of both giving herself a break, but learning to approach our students and their experiences as well as our fellow faculty colleagues. And yes, our administrators were not always the bad guys, with grace. And
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
felt that grace today. I want to title this episode "The Diary of a Graceful Mad Social Scientist." I know it'll be vetoed, but that's how I felt. That's who she was. I mean, I think she embodies that grace. Call it authenticity, but also just an amazing practice in the classroom and giving
Hmm.
her students. She's changing lives one
Yeah,
one one individual student classroom at a time.
fueled by Diet Coke and a big cookie.
Oh my God, I love it. I'm
I I could not start the day with a hit of sugar from a cookie, and that just shows how we are each unique and special individuals.
weirdly enough, and I always use movies, and so the person I thought about was Andy Kaufman, found grace in a way later in his career, and and when he knew that his life was nearing its end in one of his last performances, he took the entire audience out for milk and warm
Milk and
cookies.
cookies.
And because
Yeah.
he could not imagine any gesture that embodied kind of the human condition in a way, which was part of what made him a genius. So I don't know
Yeah.
why I don't know if Erin will appreciate the Andy Kaufman comparison or find any hidden meaning in it, but that's where my weirdly trained brain went.
Well, cookies were involved, so. So, Tom, I think it is time for me to put on my psychology hat. And because you keep talking about how you are woeful at self-care
Did I use the
and
word woeful? Oh gosh, I know I'm hard on myself.
you are hard on yourself. So I'm going to offer you my services as your little wellness, fairy godmother.
Tell me more, I ask
Because
cautiously and
I
trepidatiously.
I shared my own little personal intervention project that I'm doing with my health psychology students. I'm going to try and jump rope regularly again.
For the record, I
So
imagine you in the Rocky kind of cloak that he wears with the hood.
we'll
When
be
he's
lucky if I
training.
take off my pajamas.
Okay. Leave me my mental idealized images of you hard at work with the Rocky training program and music pumping in.
Well, so the thing is, I ask my students to make it small, right? Because of course, any behavior change has to start small. It doesn't have to be earth shattering. Maybe there's one little thing. Maybe Erin inspired you to give yourself some grace. Maybe there's one little thing that you can think about doing before we meet again to record our next podcast.
All right,
Tom.
and I don't want to be alone in this. I think for anyone listening, I think that clearly I imagine the value your students see in this assignment. I love an assignment that, I mean, literally the work of the assignment is changing an aspect of their lives for the better.
Well,
And
it's changing their lives, but if they don't change their lives, they can still get an A on the assignment because they're learning about how hard it can be to change a behavior. But they're learning the skills that they might be able to use in the future to change that behavior.
Here's what I'm hearing, Gina. When I set my task, this goal, minute though it may be, when I inevitably fail to complete it in some aspect, that I can still get an A on this assignment. I like the sound of this, but I will give it. And no, I apologize for saying this awful pun. I almost said punny, which is literally the worst word in the human language, but I will give it the old college try.
Yay.
Oh, that was bad. That is a groaner and a half.
But that is all we can ask. Wait, but you didn't say what you're going to do.
Oh,
you got to set a goal.
You can't put me on. I don't think I can. I am not prepared to be put on the spot like that.
All right, fine. But
I feel like I will come back. I want to choose something that will legitimately, provide a boon and a help in my life.
Okay, fair enough.
And so I will seek my own balm in Gilead and come up with something, and I will tell the story of its either wild success or equally wild, spectacular failure when we return.
That sounds good. And I will also report in on my attempt at jumping rope.
I'm immediately imagining myself as Bill Murray, as I hope at some moment, has a student ever said with this instruction, I'm baby stepping, I'm doing the work?
Well, you will be the first.
I am already the first.
And if it requires, because I know what you're talking about, if it requires you roping yourself to the mast of the boat in order to call yourself a sailor, that is a baby step.
I'm a sailor. I'm in. If this, you know what? I'm gonna dream big, Gina.
Good. Not too big though. Not too big. Realistic.
Well,
all right.
listen,
I wish you grace and I wish you luck, Tom.
Namaste. Until next time.
Ta-da!
Hey, thanks for listening to Pedagogy A Go-Go, recorded in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Our podcast daydreamer/showrunner is Kelly Allen, and Pedagogy A Go-Go is produced by Jeff Armstrong. If you've got any questions, please send them to pedagogyagogo@gmail.com. Our social media handle is @pedagogyagogo, and you can stop by our website at www.pedagogyagogo.com for copies of podcast transcripts, guest assignments, and other useful tidbits. Keep in mind there are no hyphens or dots in any of the above web addresses. Until next time, this is Gina and Tom saying, take care and teach well.